The dust kicked up from the hooves of Samuel McKenna's last remaining horse as he led the beautiful chestnut mare across the sprawling Texas landscape. His weathered hands gripped the lead rope tightly, not from fear of losing the animal, but from the weight of what this moment represented. After 32 years of running cattle and horses on this unforgiving land, everything he had built was coming to an end. Samuel's ranch had once been home to over 300 head of cattle and 50 of the finest horses in all of West Texas. The McKenna brand was respected from El Paso to San Antonio. But a series of harsh winters, followed by the worst drought anyone could remember, had slowly eaten away at his livelihood. One by one, he had sold off his animals just to keep food on the table for his family. Now, his wife Sarah lay sick in their small adobe house, and their savings had dwindled to nothing. The mare, a 5-year-old beauty named Estrella, was all that remained of his once proud herd. She was worth enough money to buy medicine for Sarah, and perhaps a few more months of provisions. Samuel had already arranged to meet a buyer from Austin who was willing to pay a fair price. But as he walked toward the trading post in the small border town of Esperanza, something made him pause. Near the edge of town, he spotted 2 young Apache women sitting beneath the shade of a large mesquite tree. They appeared to be sisters, both in their early 20s, with long black hair braided with colorful beads and wearing traditional buckskin dresses adorned with intricate beadwork. The older sister was carefully tending to what looked like a leg wound on the younger one, using strips of cloth and what Samuel recognized as medicinal herbs. Samuel had lived on the frontier long enough to know that encounters between white settlers and Apache people were often tense, sometimes violent. But something about the scene before him stirred a memory from his childhood. His own father had once told him stories of how Apache medicine women had saved his life when he was lost in the desert as a young man. They had asked for nothing in return except his promise to show the same kindness to others when the opportunity arose. As Samuel approached cautiously, the older sister looked up at him with dark, intelligent eyes that showed no fear, only wariness. She spoke in accented English, her voice steady and clear. "You are far from your ranch, white man. The sun grows hot, and your horse needs water." Samuel was surprised by her directness and her knowledge of English. He nodded respectfully and gestured toward Estrella. "Yes, ma'am. We've been traveling since before dawn. Might I ask if there's a stream nearby where she can drink?" The younger sister, despite her obvious pain, smiled slightly at his polite manner. "There is water beyond those rocks," she said, pointing toward a cluster of red sandstone formations. "But it is not much. The drought has taken most of it." Samuel looked at the younger woman's injury more carefully and saw that it was quite serious. Her leg appeared to be broken, and from the makeshift splint and the way she held herself, he could tell she had been in pain for some time. "How long has she been hurt?" he asked the older sister. 3 days, came the reply. "We were gathering medicine plants in the mountains when she fell from a cliff. I managed to get her this far, but we cannot travel much further. Our people are camped many miles from here, and I cannot carry her that distance." Samuel felt his chest tighten. Here were 2 young women, stranded and in need of help, just as his wife lay suffering at home. The parallel was not lost on him. He looked at Estrella, then back at the sisters. An idea began to form in his mind, one that his practical nature told him was foolish, but that his heart insisted was right. "Can you both ride?" he asked suddenly. The older sister's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why do you ask this?" Samuel took off his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Well, ma'am, I'm heading into town to sell this horse, but it occurs to me that you ladies need her more than I need the money she'd bring." He paused, knowing how crazy his next words would sound. "If you can get her back to your people safely, she's yours." Both sisters stared at him in shock. The younger one whispered something in Apache to her sister, who responded in the same language. Their conversation was rapid and intense, with frequent glances toward Samuel. Finally, the older sister spoke. "You would give us your horse? What do you want in return?" Samuel shook his head. "Nothing, ma'am. Sometimes a man just needs to do what's right, regardless of the cost." The older sister studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his true intentions. "I am called Ayana," she said finally. This is my sister Itzel. We are daughters of Chief Nalnish, of the Mescalero Apache. Samuel's eyes widened at this revelation. Chief Nalnish was a name he knew well. The chief was both respected and feared throughout the territory, known for his fierce protection of his people but also for his adherence to honor and tradition. Samuel realized he was not just helping two random travelers, but the daughters of one of the most powerful Apache leaders in the region. "I'm Samuel McKenna," he replied, extending his hand in friendship. "And I'm honored to meet you both." "I'm Samuel McKenna." Ayanna looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before grasping it firmly. Her grip was strong, and Samuel could feel the calluses that spoke of a life lived outdoors, working with her hands. "Samuel McKenna," she repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "You are not like other white men we have encountered." Samuel helped them carefully mount Estrella, with Itzel sitting in front and Ayanna behind her to provide support. The mare, sensing the urgency of the situation, stood perfectly still as the two women settled themselves on her back. As they prepared to leave, Ayanna looked down at Samuel with an expression that was hard to read. "Our father will want to know of your kindness," she said. "The Mescalero do not forget debts of honor." Samuel nodded and stepped back. "Just get your sister home safely. That's all the payment I need." He watched as they rode slowly toward the mountains, Ayanna guiding Estrella with expert hands while supporting her injured sister. The sight of his last horse disappearing into the distance should have filled him with despair, but instead, Samuel felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. When he returned home that evening empty-handed, Sarah was awake and asked about the horse sale. Samuel sat beside her bed and told her everything that had happened. To his surprise, Sarah smiled weakly and took his hand. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "Money comes and goes, but honor lasts forever." As Samuel lay awake that night, listening to the coyotes howling in the distance, he wondered what would become of the two Apache sisters. He had no way of knowing that his act of kindness would soon bring about consequences he could never have imagined, or that before the next sunrise, his quiet ranch would become the center of a gathering that would change his life forever. The first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon when Samuel McKenna was awakened by a sound he had never heard before on his ranch. It was low and rhythmic, like distant thunder, but it seemed to come from the earth itself rather than the sky. Still half asleep, he stumbled to the window of his small bedroom and peered out into the gray morning light. What he saw made his blood run cold with a mixture of fear and awe. Spread across the valley that led to his ranch was a sight that belonged more to legend than reality. Hundreds of Apache warriors sat motionless on their horses, arranged in perfect formation like a living wall of bronze and steel. Even in the dim light, Samuel could see the glint of weapons, the proud bearing of seasoned fighters, and the colorful patterns of war paint that decorated both horses and riders. At the head of this impressive force rode a single figure who commanded attention even at a distance. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with long gray hair that flowed from beneath a magnificent headdress adorned with eagle feathers. His chest was crossed with traditional Apache war regalia, and he carried a lance that seemed to catch the first rays of sunlight like a beacon. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest as he realized who this must be. Chief Nalnish had come to his ranch, and he had brought what appeared to be his entire war party with him. The rancher's mind raced as he tried to understand what this meant. Had he somehow offended the Apache by helping the chief's daughters? Was this a show of force meant to intimidate him? Or worse, was this the beginning of a raid? Sarah stirred in her bed behind him, awakened by his sharp intake of breath. "Samuel? What is it?" "Stay in bed," he whispered, not taking his eyes off the scene outside. "And stay quiet." But even as fear gripped him, Samuel noticed something strange about the gathering. The warriors were not moving toward his house. They were not whooping or charging or showing any of the aggressive behaviors he would expect from a war party. Instead, they simply sat and waited, as still as statues, as if they were honoring some kind of ceremony or protocol. Samuel dressed quickly in his best shirt and pants, knowing instinctively that this moment called for whatever dignity he could muster. As he stepped outside onto his small porch, The sheer magnitude of what faced him became even more apparent. He estimated there were at least 200 warriors, possibly more. Each man was mounted on a sturdy horse, and their discipline was absolute. Not a single animal shifted or snorted or showed any sign of restlessness. Chief Nalnish urged his horse forward, separating himself from the group and riding slowly toward Samuel's house. As he drew closer, Samuel could see the man's face clearly for the first time. It was a face carved by years of desert sun and mountain wind, marked by scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. But it was the chief's eyes that captured Samuel's attention. They were dark and penetrating, holding a wisdom and intensity that made the rancher feel as though his very soul was being examined. The chief stopped his horse about 20 feet from the porch and sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Samuel forced himself to remain still, sensing that this was some kind of test or ritual that required patience. Finally, Chief Nalnish spoke, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily across the distance between them. "You are Samuel McKenna," he said. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded despite the circumstances. "Yesterday, you gave your last horse to my daughters." Again, Samuel nodded. "Yes, sir. They needed help, and I was in a position to provide it." The chief's expression remained unreadable. "Do you know who I am?" "I believe you are Chief Nalnish of the Mescalero Apache." "I am." The chief paused, his gaze never leaving Samuel's face. "Do you know what it means for a man to give away his last horse?" Samuel considered the question carefully before answering. "I reckon it means he's either very foolish or very desperate, Chief. Or maybe he's just trying to do what his conscience tells him is right." For the first time, the hint of a smile played at the corners of the chief's mouth. "My daughters told me of your kindness. They said you asked for nothing in return, expected nothing, wanted nothing except to see them safely home." "That's correct. In my culture," Chief Nalnish continued, "when a man shows such honor to the family of a chief, it creates a debt. Not just any debt, but a debt of the deepest kind. A debt that touches the very spirit of our people." Samuel felt his mouth go dry. The implications of the chief's words were both thrilling and terrifying. He glanced again at the massive gathering of warriors and tried to imagine what kind of debt could require such a show of force to repay. "Chief," he said carefully, "I appreciate your words, but I truly don't expect anything in return for what I did. Your daughters were in trouble, and any decent man would have done the same." Chief Nalnish shook his head slowly. "You do not understand. Among my people, honor is not something that can be dismissed or set aside. When honor demands action, we must act, regardless of personal convenience or desire." The chief raised his hand, and immediately the sound of movement came from the gathered warriors, but instead of the threatening advance Samuel had feared, something entirely different began to happen. Groups of warriors were dismounting and moving toward the various outbuildings on his ranch. Others were unloading supplies from pack horses that Samuel had not noticed in his initial shock. "What's happening?" Samuel asked, his confusion evident. "My daughters also told me of your sick wife," the chief replied. "And they spoke of the drought that has taken your cattle, the hardships that forced you to sell your animals one by one, until only the horse remained." Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks. The idea that his personal struggles had been discussed and judged by others, even with good intentions, embarrassed him deeply. Chief Nalnish seemed to sense his discomfort. "There is no shame in facing hardship, Samuel McKenna. There is only shame in facing it without honor, and you have shown that honor is more important to you than personal gain." As the chief spoke, Samuel began to see what the warriors were actually doing. Some were examining his empty corrals and pastures. Others were setting up what appeared to be a temporary camp near his barn. Still others were approaching his house, carrying bundles that looked suspiciously like medical supplies. "Chief Nalnish," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what exactly is happening here?" The older man's smile became more pronounced. "The Mescalero are repaying a debt. You gave my daughters a horse when they needed one. Now we give you horses when you need them." As if his words were a signal, Samuel heard the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. He turned to see another group of Apache riders cresting a nearby hill, and behind them came a sight that made his heart stop. A herd of horses, at least 50 strong, was being driven toward his ranch by skilled Apache horsemen. The animals were magnificent. Samuel had spent enough years in the horse business to recognize quality when he saw it, and these were some of the finest horses he had ever laid eyes on. There were sturdy mustangs with the endurance to travel hundreds of miles without tiring, sleek mares with the speed of antelope, and powerful stallions with the strength to carry a man through any terrain. "I cannot accept this," Samuel said, though his voice lacked conviction even to his own ears. "You can, and you will," Chief Nalnish replied firmly. "But that is not all. My medicine woman is even now tending to your wife. She has brought herbs and knowledge that may help where white man's medicine has failed." Samuel's protest died in his throat. The thought of Sarah receiving help, real help, from someone with different knowledge and skills, was too precious to refuse out of pride. Chief Nalnish dismounted and walked to the edge of Samuel's porch. Up close, the rancher could see that despite his imposing presence, the chief was probably near his own age, perhaps in his late 50s. The lines around his eyes spoke of a man who had seen much joy and much sorrow, and who had learned to accept both with equal grace. "There is more," the chief said quietly. "But first, I would speak with your wife, if she is able. My daughters wish to thank her personally for raising a man of such character." Samuel felt tears threaten to overwhelm him. The magnitude of what was happening, the generosity being shown by people he had been taught to fear and distrust, was almost too much to comprehend. All his life, he had heard stories of Apache raids and Apache violence, but here was a different story, one of honor and reciprocity, and the deep bonds that could form between people who chose to see each other as human beings rather than enemies. The sun had fully risen by the time Samuel led Chief Nalnish into his modest home, his heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. Sarah had managed to sit up in bed, her face pale but alert, clearly having heard the commotion outside, despite Samuel's instructions to remain quiet. When the imposing Apache leader entered their small bedroom, ducking slightly under the low doorframe, Sarah's eyes widened with surprise but showed no fear. Behind the chief came his two daughters, Ayana and Itzel. The younger sister was walking with the aid of a carefully crafted wooden crutch, but her injury appeared to be healing well. Both young women moved with quiet grace as they approached Sarah's bedside, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Mrs. McKenna," Ayana said softly, her English careful but clear. "We have come to thank you." "We have come to thank you." Sarah looked confused, glancing between her husband and the Apache visitors. "Thank me? For what?" "For raising a man who values honor above profit," Chief Nalnish answered before his daughter could respond. His voice filled the small room with quiet authority. "Your husband gave us his last horse when we were in need. Such generosity speaks not just of his character, but of the woman who helped shape that character." Tears began to flow down Sarah's cheeks as she looked at Samuel with new understanding. "You gave them Estrella?" "But Samuel, we needed that money for medicine, for supplies." Itzel stepped forward then, carrying a leather pouch that she placed gently on Sarah's bedside table. "We have brought medicine," she said. "Our grandmother is the greatest healer among all the Apache tribes. She has prepared special treatments for your illness." An elderly Apache woman Samuel had not noticed before emerged from the shadows of the room. She was tiny and bent with age, but her eyes sparkled with intelligence and kindness. Her weathered hands moved with practiced skill as she began to examine various herbs and powders from the leather pouch. "This is our grandmother, Sitlali," Ayana explained. "She has lived through 92 summers and knows the healing properties of every plant that grows in these mountains and deserts." The old medicine woman spoke in rapid Apache to Chief Nalnish, who nodded gravely and translated for Samuel and Sarah. "She says your wife's sickness comes from inside, from worry and grief as much as from any physical ailment. The drought has taken not just your livelihood, but your hope. She can help heal both." Over the next several hours, Samuel watched in amazement as his small ranch was transformed into something resembling a temporary Apache village. The warriors had not come to raid or intimidate, but to work. Under the direction of various Apache leaders, they began repairing fences that had been broken by years of harsh weather, cleaning out water troughs that had long been empty, and even starting construction on a new barn to replace the one that had partially collapsed the previous winter. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the care being shown to Sarah. The old medicine woman, Sitlali, worked tirelessly, preparing poultices and herbal teas, conducting healing ceremonies that seemed to combine practical medicine with spiritual healing. Other Apache women had joined them, and they took turns sitting with Sarah, telling stories, sharing laughter, and providing the kind of companionship she had been missing during her long illness. As the day progressed, Chief Nalnish took Samuel on a tour of his own property, showing him improvements that were being made and explaining the gifts that were being bestowed. The herd of horses was only the beginning. Apache craftsmen were also leaving behind tools, weapons, and supplies that would help Samuel rebuild his ranch from nothing. "I still don't understand why you're doing all this," Samuel said as they stood watching warriors construct a new water tank near his main corral. "What I did was just basic human decency. It doesn't deserve this kind of response." Chief Nalnish was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face contemplative. "Tell me, Samuel McKenna, what do you know of Apache history with white settlers?" Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I know there's been fighting, raids and battles, and a lot of mistrust on both sides." "That is true. For many years, my people and your people have seen each other only as enemies. We have taken cattle and horses when we needed them, and white men have taken our land and our freedom in return." The cycle of violence seemed endless. The chief paused to watch his warriors working alongside Samuel's property, their movements efficient and purposeful. "But I have lived long enough to learn that hatred is a fire that consumes the one who carries it. When my daughters returned home yesterday and told me of your kindness, it reminded me that there are good people among all races, people who choose to do what is right, even when it costs them dearly." Samuel felt overwhelmed by the chief's words and the magnitude of what was happening around him. "But surely you didn't bring 200 warriors just to rebuild one small ranch." Chief Nalnish smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "You are correct. We came for another reason as well. This gathering serves as an example to all our young warriors, a demonstration that strength can be used for building rather than destroying. They needed to see that true power lies not in taking what you want, but in giving what is needed." As evening approached, the pace of work began to slow. Samuel was amazed to see that in a single day, his ranch had been transformed. The new horses grazed contentedly in repaired pastures, fresh water flowed into newly constructed troughs, and buildings that had been falling down were now solid and functional. But the greatest transformation was in Sarah herself. The Apache medicine woman's treatments, combined with the care and companionship of the Apache women, had brought color back to her cheeks and strength back to her voice. For the first time in months, she was sitting up without assistance, laughing and talking with her new friends, as if she had known them for years. Chief Nalnish called Samuel aside as the warriors began to prepare for their departure. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice serious. "From this day forward, you and your family are under the protection of the Mescalero Apache. Should you ever face trouble that you cannot handle alone, send word to us, and we will come." Samuel was speechless. The idea that he, a simple rancher, who had struggled to make ends meet, would now have the protection of one of the most powerful Apache tribes in the territory was almost impossible to believe. "Furthermore," the chief continued, "you are welcome in our village at any time. My daughters have asked that you and your wife visit us when she is fully recovered. They wish to show you our ways and learn more of yours." As the Apache began to mount their horses and prepare for the journey back to their homeland, Ayanna and Itzel approached Samuel one final time. Both young women embraced him warmly, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just days before. "You have changed our father's heart," Ayanna said softly. "For many years, he has spoken only of the wrongs done to our people by white settlers. Now he speaks of the possibility of peace, of finding common ground between our peoples." Itzel, still favoring her healing leg but moving much better than before, added, "Estrella is being well cared for. She has become a favorite among our horse herders. But more than that, She has become a symbol of what is possible when people choose trust over fear. As the sun set behind the mountains, Samuel and Sarah stood on their porch watching the Apache riders disappear into the gathering darkness. The ranch around them buzzed with the sounds of contented horses and the satisfaction of work well done. Sarah's hand found Samuel's, her grip stronger than it had been in months. "Do you think they'll really come if we need help?" she asked quietly. Samuel squeezed her hand and smiled. "I believe they will. More than that, I believe we've just witnessed the beginning of something new. Maybe it's possible for people to see past their differences and find ways to help each other instead of hurt each other." In the distance, they could hear the Apache riders singing as they traveled, their voices carrying across the desert air like a promise of hope for the future. Samuel McKenna had given away his last horse to help two strangers in need, never imagining that simple act of kindness would change not only his own life, but potentially the relationship between two peoples who had known too much conflict and too little understanding. As they prepared for bed that night, Sarah sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, and Samuel listening to the contented sounds of his new horses, the rancher realized that sometimes the greatest rewards come not from what we gain, but from what we are willing to give away.